What is silly logic? These are arguments in which the conclusions do actually address the issue. So they're different from trash talk. They're really more on point, but they still fail to make their point. These are called non sequiturs in logic. In other words, you can't get there from here. If you follow this line, you can't get to the conclusion that you really say you're getting to. Let me give you an example of this. Christopher Hitchens, and by the way, these are a little bit more difficult, so it takes a little more reflection, but I want you to think about this illustration. Because when I give it to you at first, it's going to sound a little convincing. And then you're going to see very quickly that it doesn't get you anywhere. Here's what Christopher Hitchens says. He notes that any person looking to nature for evidence of design has to face the fact that 90% of all species ever designed are now extinct. You say God designed this? Well, he did a lousy job because 98% of all the species are done for. And he takes this then as evidence against a designer. So what is his point? His point is, maybe we'll simplify his argument here. If a thing were really designed, it wouldn't go extinct, but things go extinct, so therefore they weren't designed. Anything that wasn't designed, that goes extinct, obviously wasn't designed. Okay, so now I want to ask you a question to see whether this sequencing argument is going to work. Is he onto something here? So here's the question. How many people here own a buggy whip? Now, in a place like Vancouver, maybe a few, I don't know. But buggy whips, you know what those things are, to get the horse moving. But we don't use horses anymore, right? So what has happened to buggy whips? They've gone what? Extinct. They're like the dodo birds. They're gone, right? But the fact that these are now, in a certain sense, extinct, and I understand that these aren't biological organisms. Buggy whips aren't alive. So there's a little dissimilarity here with the point that Hitchens is making, but the dissimilarity doesn't matter to the point. Because his point was, if it goes extinct, this proves that it wasn't designed. But there's all kinds of things that are designed or were designed, they're not in use anymore because the circumstances for which they were designed no longer pertain. So when you have biological things that were designed for a certain environment and that environment changes, this isn't the fault of the designer. It's just an acknowledgement that things change. And so then that living thing goes extinct. Point here, the fact that something goes extinct has no bearing on whether or not it's designed, as Christopher Hitchens suggests. That's silly logic. So when carriages give way to cars, buggy whips disappear. When wetlands dry up, frogs fade into oblivion. Extinction may tell you something about changing circumstances, but it tells you nothing about design. Hitchens, in this particular objection, I'm not saying every one of his is like this, but in this particular objection, has missed the point. He can't get what he wants out of his reasoning. It's an example of silly logic. Let me give you another example. And this is a very popular one in atheist circles. If I were an atheist, I wouldn't use this because I think it makes the atheist look foolish. There is an argument in favor of the existence of God based on the fine-tuned qualities of the universe. The universe is very finely balanced. I'm not going to get into that argument right now, but it's called the teleological argument or the fine-tuned argument, whatever. And it's compelling to a lot of people, and many atheists have been won over by this because the evidence is strong. But there is a rejoinder that atheists will use to this argument, and that is, okay, you say that God made the universe. Okay, who made God? Now, I'm using a little tone of voice there to make it sound a little silly, but the reason I do this is because this is the kind of question that children ask, because they don't know any better. Now, Richard Dawkins thinks that's a virtue of his argument. He said, even a child knows to ask this question. And my response is, yes, a child knows to ask this question because it doesn't know why the question isn't appropriate. It's also, who designed the designer is another way of putting this. I did a 3-hour national radio debate with Michael Shermer, who is a very well-known American atheist, who is the editor of Skeptic Magazine. And I knew this issue was going to come up because he springs it, and they know better, they ought to know better, but I knew it was going to come up, so I was ready beforehand. And this is, if you get involved in these things, you think you might, a good thing to do is to try to think in advance of what might they challenge me with, and then how would I respond it? Because you don't have to plan on being quick on your feet, you just plan in advance. And so I had this worked out, and here's what I said, because Michael raised this issue. And I said, listen, Michael, you don't believe God exists, so you don't believe anybody created God. I believe God was eternal. Therefore, I don't think God was created. In other words, nobody in this conversation believes God was created, so why are you asking me who created God? Now, I sprung on him a little bit, but I think it was a fair challenge to him. And because and he knows this, and Richard Dawkins knows this, and Christopher Hitchens knows this. All these smart guys know this. The audience doesn't always know this, so the smart guys are taking advantage of the ignorance of the audience. And what they know is there is nothing about my case as a theist that requires me to answer the question, who made God? Now they think, well, you're asking who made the world, so I can say who made God. But see, this is a case of willful ignorance as to the nature of the argument. Because when we say who made the world, we only ask that because we know the world was made. And what I mean by that is that it came into existence. Everybody holds to Big Bang cosmology now. This is not really, nobody holds to the eternal universe. So all people think the universe came into existence. So it's reasonable then, given that something came into existence, to ask what caused that. But nobody believes that God was created or designed. So why ask that question of God? Think of it this way. You go to the beach, you see shoe prints in the sand, and you think, well, somebody was here. Do you have a beach? You have a beach here. You actually have like sand, right? So this, okay, just checking. I know there's water out there, but I wasn't sure if there was a, you don't actually have surf though, I imagine, right? Okay. So you do? I mean, surf means surf that you can actually surf. I don't mean just a wave. You do that? Oh, well, good. Well, good for you. I guess you can get out there, break the ice, you know. I don't think this is a productive direction for me to go, is it? So you go to the beach, and you see shoe prints in the sand, and you say, well, somebody was here before us, you know, to your buddy. You say, well, we weren't the first ones on the beach. And your friend says, okay, smarty pants, who made the shoes? Well, you're laughing because you realize when put that way, you see how silly this is. Are you justified when you see shoe prints in concluding that someone was walking there? What do you say? Yeah, I'd say so. The evidence is pretty clear that it wasn't, you know, the wind and the seagulls and the seashells doing this thing accidentally. This makes sense. But you realize also that you are within your rights concluding that it was made by someone, even if you don't know the maker of the shoes. This is a separate issue. You know, when you find a dead body, you know, the first thing you have to do is find out whether the person died, like if you're into forensics, died through natural causes, right? Or foul play, right? Well, can you imagine guys saying, well, you know, he's got 6 bullet holes in the chest, but if we say that he was murdered, then we're going to have to figure out who did it. And I don't know who did it. Do you know who did it? No, I don't know who did it. Oh, well, let's just say it happened by accident. First, you have to determine there was an agent involved before you start asking the question, who is the agent? That's the right order. And so to fault Christians because they're arguing from evidence that there was someone, you know, behind the curtain, as it were, making things happen, monkeying with leaving fingerprints around, giving evidence of design. To fault them because they haven't answered the question, who made him, misses the point entirely. This is silly logic. You don't need to know who the manufacturer was to know that the shoes were manufactured or something like that. You don't need to know who the creator designer was in order to be able to see whether something was designed. This is not a sound way of arguing. And like I said, if I were an atheist, I would never say, well, then who made God? As if like I'm scot-free now. I've just ended it. I've defeated the whole theistic worldview. It actually sounds silly to say that. But these guys do it, and they get a lot of traction out of it. Okay, so it turns out when you take all of the trash talk and you remove that, and then you remove the silly logic, there's not a whole lot left. In fact, just about the only thing left that's a substantive, on point, rational argument against God turns out to be the problem of evil. Now, I will talk about that in just a bit, but it turns out that the problem of evil does not help the atheist. It actually buries the atheist, as I'll show you.